talking to Michel Hogan from Brandology about exactly what is one's brand and why this matters. Welcome, Michel.
Why, thank you, Fiona. It's so great to be here. I really enjoy talking about brand any chance I get.
Which is fabulous, because that's what I'm going to quiz you thoroughly about today. Now, firstly, you've written a manifesto on brands some time ago, but you've done a whole manifesto.
Yep.
How did you define brand in your manifesto?
Well, I define brand in my manifesto pretty much the way I always define it, which is this sort of very broad-based perspective that brand is both what you believe and what your actions show. And these are authentic things. They're not something that you make up, and they come very much from the inside out. And so a lot of people struggle with that definition because they say, well, you know, but isn't brand just about marketing? And not in my world.
Mm-hmm. Where do we usually get confused when talking a brand? What is it not? You just mentioned there people confuse it with marketing. Is that common? And what is brand not?
Oh, the list of what brand isn't, I think a better way for me to frame an answer to that question is that brand is inclusively a lot of the things that people individually assign to it, right? And they say, you know, our brand is our logo. Well, it's not just your logo. Your logo has a part of it. It is a marker of your brand, but it's not your brand. You know, our tagline, our marketing campaigns, it's mostly those customer-facing, customer touch-point stuff that organisations get very wrapped up in, and largely they're cosmetic. So they're the visual, the look, the feel, the colours, what the actual message is also, you know, a lot of times gets supplanted for brand. And all of those things are part of your brand, absolutely. But in and of themselves, they aren't your brand because they have to stem from this sort of deeper point, this core point of your brand, which is, as I said, the belief and action piece.
The bread and butter of your business, Brandology, is working directly with companies on their brand, aligning that to what they do. Now, you would have something, insight that we don't have about the mistakes that are most commonly made when it comes to brand. How do you identify them, and then how do you sort them out?
Oh, that's such a great question, because most of what I do is dealing with the issues that people have with brand. And I think the number one mistake that people make is getting tied up in that cosmetic stuff, is worrying too much, and especially with sort of startup organisations or emerging organisations, getting caught up too early on in that sort of the veneer, the look, and not focusing enough and really building that sense of alignment between those core elements. Sort of really working to understand, what do we stand for? Why are we here? You know, why do we exist? Because without that sort of understanding, it becomes really difficult as you move forward to actually do anything so that it's in alignment. And so what the biggest mistake I make, and what I typically end up dealing with, is organisations bring me in. Not all that often do I come in at the very early startup stage, but about 3 to 5 years later, you know, they bring me in, they go, wow, we've got all this, you know, this is all not making sense, and we've got this over here, and over here, you know, something's completely different, and our customers don't seem to be, we can't get any traction.
Add on because of different bits added at different phases.
Exactly. And there's no real sense of consistency, continuity, adhesiveness to what's being built. And so the best piece of advice I can give any organisation, and the one that I tell any organisation, no matter what stage they're at, is to be deliberate. It's a really, it's an easy concept, but it's one that people find it very difficult to do, because it's so easy to be ad hoc and to say, oh, well, this over here, it's just that, and it doesn't matter. But really, but there isn't an issue in an organisation that isn't a brand issue.
Okay.
That's a pretty big statement, but there really isn't when you think about it, because the littlest things can unravel, you know, the most carefully planned sort of approaches. and they have consequences. I mean, just recently we saw Virgin, you know, accidentally sending out their email.
I suffered an upgrade.
Me too. I'd flown with them.
Gold status.
Yeah, gold status after 3 flights. Wow.
Then it was rescinded.
Yeah, you guys are really nice. I actually never got the rescinding email, which was interesting, but I never actually thought it was serious. My initial response to it was, oh, somebody's spoofing Virgin.
Whereas I thought, you guys are being dishonest with yourself in your marketing, because I've only... You know, I would have at most 100 Virgin credits.
Right.
No.
And so, but I think they reacted really well. You know, they remedied it as quickly as they could once they noticed the problem. They did it in a way that was pretty honest. You know, they didn't try and spin it. They just said, oops, sorry, we screwed up. You know, this shouldn't have happened. And I think that's actually the best way to do that sort of stuff. But that really came from a pretty authentic place about their brand. You know, their brand is pretty much, you know, dealing in a fairly upfront way with their customers, and you know, and in a little bit of a fun way. So there's always that little bit of a wink and a smile, and that was, they built that into what they did in response. And I think, you know, when you have that sort of grounding, when you have that sort of really strong brand base, those types of issues become less concerning for the organisation. They have less ramifications.
Are you then saying that your brand is very much tied to your core values for your business, and therefore you must know what they are?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually have written quite a bit about this idea that what I believe to be one of the foundation elements of a brand for any stage of organisation is having a set of core values. Now that becomes harder when you're a startup, right? Because when you're coming out of the gate,
has a view. All the founders have a view, and there's difference in the views, and that's part of the startup thing.
And you get them all coming, you know, and so what you end up with is sort of a set of beliefs, which are really sort of somewhat aspirational. You know, this is the type of company we want to be. This is the type of things we want to do.
But it's not what we are now.
But it can't be what you are yet, because you're not doing it yet. And so that's why that early, you know, 2 to 3 year period out of the gate for an organisation, whether it be a traditional startup or just a small business that somebody's getting going, is so important to pay attention to that stuff and really, you know, well, this is what we set out of the gate we wanted to be, and this is what we said we believed and that we were going to do. How are we doing on that? Are we actually doing that, or aren't we? And if we're not, why aren't we? Were we kidding ourselves? You know, because it's got to be authentic. It's got to come from something that's actually real and true. Otherwise, you can't do it, not for any length of time.
About when do you know that you've got your core values sorted?
I think, as a general rule, across all the organisations that I've worked with over the years, about 3 years out is usually a good point at which organisations have either really embraced it and have started and are living it and really have embedded those things deeply, or they've turned a different direction. And so that 3 year point, I think, is a good stage for an organisation to stand back and look at itself and say, well, how are we doing on this? And then, you know, you pretty much know. Yes, they were real. Yes, that's what we're doing. Or, well, we were kind of full of shit, weren't we?
Didn't get oops.
Well, you know, well, never mind. I mean, and at that point, you need to step back and say, okay, well, what really are we? And because you've been doing something for 3 years, you've got a history there now that you can look at and that you can draw from and say, okay, well, based on this is actually what it should be, and that's okay. And then from that point forward, you can start to be more deliberate. But you've got to give yourself, as a startup and as a young organisation, you've got to give yourself a bit of wiggle room. Got to.
Michelle, thank you for your time today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Fiona.
I've been talking to Michel Hogan from Brandology, and we'll talk more about brand matters in coming weeks.